I had just arrived at my lake cabin, hoping for a peaceful weekend away from the chaos of city life. The air was crisp, the water calm, and the silence perfect. But as I stepped onto my dock, something felt off. There were voices, laughter, footsteps. I turned a corner and froze. Strangers were lounging on my property, not just near the cabin inside. My private retreat had been invaded. I approached cautiously, asking who they were and why they were there. One woman, with a smug smile and a clipboard, said, "We're guests of Karen." She said it was fine. Karen, the HOA enforcer. The woman who had made my life miserable since the day I bought this cabin. I told them to leave, politely at first, but they refused. That's when I banned them and Karen from ever stepping foot on my property again. Little did I know, Karen wasn't going to take that lightly. The very next morning, I was jolted awake by a loud knock on my cabin door. I opened it to find Karen standing stiffly with crossed arms and that same clipboard clutched like a weapon. Behind her stood 2 uniformed police officers. "You can't ban me," she snapped. "This property falls under HOA jurisdiction. I have every right to grant access to my guests." I tried to stay calm. "This is my private cabin. I own this land. You trespassed." One of the officers glanced at Karen, then at me. "Can we step inside and talk?" Inside, I explained everything. How Karen had never received permission to use the property. How I caught her guests trespassing. Karen butted in. "My guests were invited." I told them it was fine. The officers looked uneasy. Something wasn't adding up. I offered documentation proof of ownership, property boundaries, even emails with the HOA. Karen's face turned pale. She hadn't expected me to be prepared. After the officers reviewed my documents and confirmed the boundaries, one of them gave Karen a firm look. "This doesn't appear to fall under HOA jurisdiction," he said. "You need to leave." Karen stood frozen, lips pressed tight. Her grip tightened on the clipboard, then she turned and stormed off without another word. The officers apologized for the disturbance, and I watched them drive away. The sound of gravel crunching under their tires, fading into the silence. Peace. At last or so, I believed, but Karen wasn't done. That evening, a strange SUV parked across from my cabin. 2 men stepped out, holding surveying equipment. Ignore them, I told myself. Probably just maintenance. But they WEREN, single quotes to Karen had sent them. She was trying to redraw boundaries, challenge my ownership. By the next morning there were orange flags placed along the edge of my property. Survey markers. I confronted the men now pacing my land. They claimed they were redefining boundaries on behalf of the HOA, but when I asked for credentials or a permit, they hesitated. One even admitted, "Karen told us you don't own the full lot." My frustration turned into resolve. I contacted my lawyer and sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA. Then I did something bold. I installed security cameras, not just around the cabin facing the lake, the driveway, the property lines. If they wanted to play games, I'd have the footage. Karen had overplayed her hand, and the next card I was going to deal, would leave her stunned. A few days later, I received a letter from the HOA. It wasn't your average complaint. It accused me of creating an aggressive environment and intimidating community members. The irony wasn't lost on me. They cited my surveillance cameras, my confrontation with the surveyors, and my refusal to allow access to shared HOA amenities. I was floored. My cabin wasn't part of their communal area. It was independently purchased, with zero contractual obligation to the HOA. Yet now, Karen was trying to rewrite reality, so I fired back. I wrote a response, detailing the trespass, the unlawful boundary survey, and Karen's misuse of authority. My lawyer co-signed it. Then I posted the letter publicly on the community board. Let's just say, the neighbors began whispering. Karen's grip was loosening, and she knew it. Week passed. No strange cars, no flags, no drama, until I got a letter. Not from Karen, from the HOA board itself. They were investigating the legitimacy of my property claim based on a report submitted by board member Karen. They even hinted that my cabin might have been built in violation of HOA setbacks. This was getting ridiculous. I pulled out every file I had. Permits, blueprints, county approvals. My lawyer fired off a scorching reply, attaching every official document. And just when I thought Karen couldn't go lower, a neighbor dropped by. He whispered, "Karen's telling folks you forged your ownership papers." My jaw tightened. This wasn't just about land anymore. Karen wanted to destroy my reputation. Whispers spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. People I'd once chatted with at the lake were suddenly distant, avoiding eye contact. Karen's lies were working. One neighbor even said, "I heard you bribed officials to get your cabin approved." I couldn't believe it. The betrayal stung, but I stayed focused. My lawyer prepared a formal complaint against Karen and the HOA board for defamation and harassment. Then, I found something Karen hadn't counted on. A recorded HOA meeting from last year. In it, Karen casually admitted to letting her guests use the cabin since it's basically part of the community space. It was gold. I clipped the audio, attached it to our complaint, and forwarded it to the HOA's oversight committee. Karen had incriminated herself, but exposing her was only the beginning. The real storm was yet to come. Just when things felt unbearably tense, I got a call from a retired HOA member named Phil.com, voice, no nonsense. "I saw the complaint," he said. "I've had issues with Karen for years. She oversteps." Phil offered to provide testimony, not just about Karen's behavior, but about how she'd manipulated board decisions and ignored community votes. He shared something explosive. Karen had used her position to grant personal favors, from guest passes to maintenance scheduling, all against policy. I wasn't alone anymore. With Phil's help, the Oversight Committee agreed to open a formal investigation into Karen's conduct. The tides were finally turning. I sent a quiet thank you to Phil and watched the lake as the sun dipped below the horizon. Karen had built her power on fear, but fear was no match for truth. As the investigation against Karen gained traction, she didn't retreat, she retaliated. One evening, I found a printed flyer stapled to the community bulletin board near the lake. It read, "HOA, at risk, fraudulent ownership threatens us all." Right beneath the headline, my name, my cabin's address. False claims that I was exploiting loopholes to seize community property. I was livid. I pulled down the flyer and took photos. Karen was now weaponizing public fear, but her desperation spoke volumes. I updated my complaint with the new evidence and filed a separate report for public defamation. Phil helped me notify the committee and pushed to have Karen suspended during the review process. And that night, as rain poured against the cabin windows, I sat back and watched the storm rage outside and within the community. Karen was losing her grip, but the final battle was still ahead. Phil called me again, this time with a voice tight with urgency. "I need you to see something," he said. I met him at his house, and what he handed me changed everything. An old HOA ledger Karen had tried to destroy. Inside were discrepancies. Karen had waived fees for certain board members, issued guest permits without approval, and most damning charged maintenance. Work to my cabin that never happened. This wasn't just misconduct, it was embezzlement. Phil documented everything. We submitted the ledger to the Oversight Committee and local authorities. Karen was summoned for questioning. Her empire, built on manipulation and deceit, was starting to collapse. And I was finally being seen not as a rogue cabin owner, but the person who'd exposed the rot beneath the surface. Karen was summoned before the HOA Oversight Committee. She walked in, still clutching her infamous clipboard, her smile brittle. The room was packed. Neighbors, board members, Even a local news crew. Phil presented his findings with clear evidence, financial records, voice recordings, and the ledger. My lawyer followed with the defamation report and the unlawful surveying incident. Karen denied everything, but the facts spoke louder than her words. Committee members questioned her, pressing on forged approvals, misused funds, and policy violations. The more she tried to explain, the deeper the hole became. And then came the final blow. A forensic audit was authorized. If even half the allegations proved true, Karen wouldn't just lose her position, she'd face criminal charges. Outside, the hall neighbors gathered around me. "I'm sorry," one said quietly. "We didn't know the whole story." Redemption was near, but Karen still had one move left. The forensic audit revealed everything: unauthorized transactions, falsified approvals, HOA funds rerouted to personal accounts, all traced back to Karen. The committee moved swiftly. Karen was removed from her position, banned from future board involvement, and referred to law enforcement for further investigation. Neighbors who once doubted me now offered apologies. Some even rallied to support reforms in the HOA, demanding transparency and accountability. But Karen didn't go quietly. She filed a counter-complaint, claiming harassment and emotional distress. Her case was weak, but it showed she wasn't done fighting. Still, the community had changed. People were talking, organizing, watching. Karen's reign was over. But the scars she left behind would take time to heal. With Karen removed and the audit complete, the community began to breathe again. The HOA board was restructured. New members were elected, people who valued transparency and fairness. Phil was offered an advisory role, and I was invited to help draft new guidelines to prevent future abuse. Neighbors who once avoided me now waved, stopped by, even asked for advice on cabin maintenance. One afternoon, a small group gathered at my dock. They brought snacks, folding chairs, and stories. We laughed. We healed. The lake, once a battleground, had become a place of connection again, and my cabin. It stood stronger than ever, not just in wood and stone, but in the truth it had helped uncover. Karen's shadow had faded, but the lessons she left behind would shape the community for years to come. Months passed, and the lake community had transformed. The HOA now held open forums. Neighbors collaborated on shared projects, dock repairs, trail cleanups, even a summer barbecue. But the cabin had become more than just my retreat. It was a symbol, a place where truth had triumphed over manipulation, where one person's stand had sparked a movement for fairness. One evening, Phil stopped by with a gift, a framed photo of the cabin, taken from across the lake at sunset. At the bottom, he'd written, "The place that reminded us to speak up." I hung it inside, right above the fireplace. Karen's name faded from conversations. Her actions became cautionary tales, not wounds. And I found peace. Not just in solitude, but in the strength of a community that had rediscovered its voice. One quiet morning, I found an envelope tucked under my cabin door. No return address, just my name. Inside was a handwritten note. I never meant for things to go this far. I let pride cloud my judgment. "I'm sorry." It was signed, Karen. I stared at the paper, unsure how to feel. After everything, the lies, the harassment, the damage, this was unexpected. Was it sincere? A legal tactic? Or a final attempt at redemption? I didn't respond, but I kept the letter, not as a token of forgiveness, but as a reminder that even the most stubborn storms can break. That truth, when held firm, can shift even the hardest hearts. And that this cabin, once a battleground, had become a place of transformation. The seasons changed. The lake shimmered under autumn skies, and the cabin stood quietly, no longer a battleground, but a sanctuary. I hosted a small gathering one evening. Phil came. So did a few neighbors who'd once doubted me. We shared stories, laughter, and reflections. Someone asked, "Do you ever regret standing up to Karen?" I looked around at the faces, the peace, the strength we'd built together. "Not for a second," I said, because the cabin had taught me something deeper than property lines or HOA politics. It had shown me that truth needs a voice, even when it shakes the ground beneath you. That standing firm, even when alone, can inspire others to rise. And as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting golden light across the water, I knew this wasn't just my story, it was ours.